And then that I saw when it was like repeated on NPR like several times that Jeff Landry, when he heard the announcement, said, congratulations, and that he would be praying for the new Pope. So seriously, newsflash, Jeff Landry. The Pope don't need your prayers, brah.
Yeah, he didn't say which direction those prayers were going, did he? He just said prayer.
Welcome to Seriously, the podcast that dives into the baffling.
We can't send them to a prison where there's animals, where there's livestock.
The ridiculous.
Like omelets better than sex.
And downright unbelievable political climate in red states like Louisiana.
So we can't go there. There are no vegan jails.
Seriously.
Welcome to Seriously. We're your hosts, the dynamic duo. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Ellie.
And today we're going to have two guests that are fighting against the criminalization of HIV. Dietz is the statewide coordinator for the Louisiana Coalition on Criminalization and Health. DeKeitra Griffin is a steering committee member and a survivor of sexual violence. They have both been working tirelessly to stop legislation such as HB 76 and to advocate with and for people that are impacted by that law and others. So welcome to Seriously.
Thanks for being here, y'all.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So our listeners will remember last week we talked about HB 76, and we're definitely going to get into the weeds on what happened with that bill. But first, we need to know what has made each of you think seriously recently. DeKeitra, let's start with you.
Right after HB 76, so we're looking at Thursday, had to go jump back into student mode. We're doing presentations. I was with the first year doctoral students at LSU. Walked in, a presentation was about HIV. I said, oh, lovely. And the stigmatizing language that was in this entire presentation. I'm just like, wait a minute, is this really going on? And to know that it's going on within a doctoral presentation of a social work student, I'm like, I need to talk to you after. So I sent an email. I was like, do not talk to this person in the middle of the presentation. I know I'm going to be furious. I already stepped off for emotional week. Let's take some time, had a meet and greet. So we went for lunch yesterday, Friday, and we discussed it. She was very receptive, but still for me, I'm like, wait a minute. You're a social worker. You're using stigmatizing language. What is really going on here?
Any answers that shed any light?
It just went back to she really didn't know. So the education factor, nobody told her, nobody even paused her to kind of think about it. And then on the other hand, it created me to turn around and talk to the other instructors, knowing that I was going to come. And they know what I like to research, and they know this was a problem before in other classes. So it was just one thing after another. Like I talked to the initial person who I was like, let's start with you. And then after she was like, oh, well, other people signed off that it was okay. I was like, oh, this is a bigger issue. Right. Let me go back and talk to them now.
Yeah, I think so that is a really good illustration of just like how far we still have to go with educating people and addressing stigma. Crazy. Dietz, what about you?
Well, I mean, I really feel like the entire experience of HB 76 has been one giant dude seriously writ large over the last 2 months of my life. So, really the dude seriously was, wow, this is really a bill that is pretending on the face of it, or that really thinks on the face of it that it's going to support survivors, when our entire coalition exists because we know how that form and that strategy for criminalization only makes it more dangerous for survivors, only creates the environment where it's more likely that people could experience more harm on top of what they've already experienced. So my dude seriously has been about that, like for the past 2 months, in all of the different ways that it's like evolved. But on a positive dude seriously, I don't know if you've ever had anyone spin it posy, but we'll talk about this a little bit. But like when Chairwoman Villio was like, and also we are disproportionately impacted by STIs, and like this could create, more harm than we're realizing. I was like, dude, seriously, who talked to her? Yes, that's what we need. Like it was a good dude seriously. Like when I was not anticipating that she would have the stats, or that she would have been receptive to any of the education that, I know many people have tried to offer her. So that was a positive dude seriously that we are already following up on. So we can keep that dude seriously rolling into the future.
That's huge. I mean,
yeah,
we all know Villio well. and she is a real tough audience, and I think that's a nice way of putting it. um,
We love
so
generosity.
yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that that like something's breaking through. Data, science, personal stories, all of that. So yeah, like I'm not gonna do like a seriously like way to go Rapvilio, because I just cannot, like those words can't come out of my mouth. But seriously, thanks Rapvilio for listening to
Yeah.
expert.
Now keep going, right? Now keep burning it. Now show up. Like that's the first step. We want more. We want more. We're coming back for more. Yeah.
100%. All right, Ellie, what about you? What you got?
Okay, so I have two things. Number one is Ras Baraka, the mayor of Newark, being arrested by the feds when he yesterday tried to visit an ICE detention center in Newark, where he is the mayor with the congressional district who has oversight, of course, over ICE detention centers, and was arrested. I'm like actually arrested for trespassing. And this sort of follows on from, the feds arresting a judge. I can't remember if it was Wisconsin or Minnesota, but like perp walking a judge because they think that she's done something illegal, whatever. So like the federal government arresting like elected or appointed officials, just like for the show of it, for the harassment and intimidation of it. And it's like particularly like to me with like Ras Baraka too, of course, like he's the son of Amiri Baraka. Like he's like the son of like, a historic dissident in the civil rights movement who is like dealing with that kind of bullshit, with like the states arresting people, for protesting or for just being on the street or whatever, for purposes of harassment and intimidation. And now, not only are we still dealing with that bullshit like a generation later, but now it's the federal government that's doing it, not the state governments. So I'm very, very disturbed that that's where we are as a country. Number two is so everybody, including Michelle, knows that I'm not religious at all, but I do. The Schilling is my last name. Schilling's my last name. I do come from a long line of German Catholics who are Democrats and really like believed in the social justice parts of Catholicism. So like a little place in my heart is like I do save for the Catholics who really live out the social justice values.
Yeah.
Which I also saw in work. We talked about this before, the political asylum work I did in New York, where Catholic Charities was the only organization at all that we could send people to. And they did really, really extremely good work on behalf of immigrants, migrants, people facing, political persecution. So I was pleased to see that the Pope, the announcement of the new Pope, was not a conservative recalcitrant asswipe, which is what I was worried that it was after Pope Francis what the announcement was going to be. So pleased that it's someone who really is rooted in the social justice of Catholicism. And then that I saw when it was like repeated on NPR like several times that Jeff Landry, when he heard the announcement, said, congratulations, and that he would be praying for the new Pope. So seriously, newsflash, Jeff Landry, you are a horrible person. The Pope don't need your prayers, bro.
Yeah, he didn't say which direction those prayers were going, did he? He just said prayer. He didn't say.
My God.
That's a bless your heart is what that is. That's what that was. I'm going to pray for you. Yeah. I've received that before.
Well, then, of course, I'll let into them like the fucking, the Laura Loom or whatever these insane people are that, are running our country. Talk about him being a woke Pope. He's a woke Pope. Like, fuck you. Like, whatever. Like, this is just like a person who like is still going to be concerned. He's the goddamn Pope. Like, it's not going to be like anything that's so revolutionary, but he is somebody who cares about the poor and cares about migrants. So yeah, I guess that makes him a woke Pope.
And a Cajun to boot, they say. That's what my Instagram was telling me this morning. Come on, Louisiana.
Mhm.
Michelle, do you want to comment on the new Pope?
I mean, as a Jew, I really could give a shit, to be honest with you. I mean, the popes haven't traditionally been that great to the Jews. So, and especially not the German ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't Benedict like a Hitler Youth or something? Yeah, so I don't care.
Yeah, but he stepped down. He was like, nah. Anyway,
Yeah.
enough Pope shit. This is not a podcast that normally talks about religion.
But that's something that Rep Moore said over and over again, is that she prayed on this. She prayed on this.
Mhm.
Prayed on this. So whether or not we want to talk about religion in Louisiana, we don't got a choice. I mean, people
Listen, it
just walk through Bible verses.
permeates everything these people are doing. It's like,
And that's again why I do think it's important who holds the Pope role, is that, with Francis, he was at least in many ways modeling good values. And most of the Catholics in our legislature, I mean, again, it's the same with Jeff Landry. These are the same people that are, trying to gut our social support system, like trying to have no decency about supporting the poor. Obviously, like immigrants, please. We're currently illegally housing in private detention centers, people who are legally in the country. So my frustration with those folks is that, yeah, they want to use religion when it's helpful to them, but they want to ignore all the parts of it that should be actually animating their not just their values, but their policy decisions.
yeah, they think the Bible's like a choose your own adventure. It's not like something that they, actually have to internalize completely.
They chose the adventure of punishment and damnation. That's
Homophobia, misogyny, the hellfire and damnation. My seriously this week is actually a personal one. So Dietz, you live in New Orleans, right? DeKeitra, do you live in New Orleans?
In Baton Rouge.
You live in Baton Rouge. All right. Well, then this may not be as relevant to you. But my seriously is people who drive in the rain in New Orleans who do not know how to fucking drive in the rain in New Orleans. Okay. It fucking rains in New Orleans. We live below sea level. It floods. It takes a special skill to drive in New Orleans, just generally, flooding streets. We've got car eating potholes. We've got drunk people. If you are not comfortable or you do not have the skills when it is pouring down rain to drive through flooded streets, then stay off the fucking road. Okay. I'm over it. Seriously, get off the road. Yesterday afternoon, streets were flooded and there were idiots driving around, stopping in the middle of the flooded street. You don't stop. That's how your fucking car stalls out. I mean, Jesus Christ.
The main thing, don't do that. Keep going. Just like with everything else in life, keep fucking going. Just do not stop. Do not overthink it. Don't get nervous. Just keep going slow and steady through the shit or the water in this instance.
What a life lesson. Just keep going slow and steady through the shit.
That's right. Yeah, that was pretty much how I ended a very stressful, very busy, very exhausting week. Was just basically raging out in my I was so infuriated. I'm just gonna stick with the personal seriously this week, and because I think that made me more just unnecessarily angry or pissed off or flabbergasted than anything else. Get off the fucking road. If you're scared to drive in the rain, don't fucking drive in the rain. Public service announcement. Okay, so let's get into the meat of things. House Bill 76 was heard in committee on Wednesday. We had double advocacy day, All In for Access and Women on Wednesday. And despite the rain, several of us that do have the skills to drive made it to Baton Rouge. And we had a really good turnout. And so just to refresh people who are listening, this is the bill that we talked about last week that would make it a crime to intentionally expose someone to an STD. And we're obviously pretty smart, Ellie and I, but we're not the experts. So that is why we wanted to talk to Dietz and DeKeitra today about this. So I'm going to just start off by asking each of you to talk a little bit about how you came to this work.
I have been working in the field of HIV since 2011 in Louisiana. I started working in public health kind of on accident. I always wanted to work with young people and queer issues, but I wasn't really sure where the connection was going to be. And then I had the opportunity to become a patient navigator. And the whole point of patient navigation is that you don't have the alphabet soup behind your name. You're closer to real ass people. But you learn the system. So you learn how to move through a medical system that you kind of have to have a sidekick to move through it with. And I worked with people who were newly diagnosed with HIV, because they work a lot or they have kids or whatever. I worked with folks who were newly diagnosed. So I started working in HIV in 2011 in New Orleans, and I was a patient navigator, which is essentially someone who knows the system really, really well and can help people kind of move through the technical aspects of especially complicated health conditions, but doesn't have all the alphabet soup. Like, I'm not a licensed social worker. I'm not a clinician. I'm just a person who's learned how to move through medical systems. And I would work with people who are newly diagnosed with HIV. So they're like just learning about this like kind of intense disease state, right? That doesn't feel intense forever for everybody. But at the beginning is usually a lot to take in, especially if you don't have a great support system. And then I also worked with folks who had stopped coming to the doctor for one reason or another. There are a million reasons why it's hard to prioritize our health, above anything else in our world. And so it's kind of like a social worker on steroids or a case manager on steroids. It's really intensive for a short period of time. And then people move on to other support systems if they need them. So I started doing that and had to talk to people about HIV criminalization. So I had to explain the laws. And then I started seeing how the laws were ruining the people who I was supposed to be supporting's lives, the ways that they were used coercively against people, the ways that people were entrapped in domestic violence relationships because they had followed the law. And it made me curious about getting more involved with policy. And I've been with LCCH for the last 3 years. So that's the very much Cliff's Notes of what brings me to the work. But as a queer and trans person, this is legacy for me. My life would not look like my life right now if it hadn't been for all of the queer people and straight people who are living with HIV who fought for us to be exactly where we are right now. So I'm in line with the fight, and I'm in line with the fight with DeKeitra too. DeKeitra, tell them why you're here.
I am here pretty much from my lived experience. Like, if we go back to 2009, I'm a senior in high school. I started taking friends, close friends, let's put emphasis on close friends, to their medical appointments. They were like, I don't want my parents to come with me. You drive. I don't even have a license. Can you take me? Sure, because I don't know about it myself. Started taking them, learned a lot, volunteered with other organizations, local CBOs, community-based organizations, then transitioned to go to school at the University of Pittsburgh. At the time, I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. So that was my whole journey. Like, we're going to get there. We're not going to say that man's name because I don't trust him anymore. But before, I was like, I want to be, screw it, fuck it. I wanted to be the next Dr. Benjamin Carson.
This is a different time, but yeah, right, yeah.
We're talking about 2000.
Now we're talking about
Totally different.
So yeah, yeah.
And I got into that and jumped into sex work. Sex work ultimately led to me being date raped. I'm not going to say it led to, but I was propositioned or even asked because of being a sex work, date rape, shut down on myself. And when I finally, campus police came, they were like, hey, people are concerned about you. People are worried about you. What's going on? Told campus police. Next thing I know, I'm at the emergency room. Fast forward from January to May, told me I had acquired syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, pubic lice, HIV, HSV, both HSV1 and HSV2. Let's just say herpes, to throw it out there. And I was like, crap, a lot is going on in my life. And I went to the police. They already had the information. Next thing I know, I'm getting told, like, hey, you can proceed with this information, but just know because of you in your line of being a sex work, we know that the DA is aware of it. So if you proceed, they are going to counter it and throw aggravated prostitution and also increase it or enhance the sentencing by saying transmission of HIV. I'm like,
So meaning if you were to go forward with trying to prosecute the person who assaulted you, then you're hearing, of course, from the police and DA's office that you yourself, as the victim of a crime, will be charged with a crime or with multiple crimes, it sounds like. Is that correct?
That is very much correct. So you think about, at the time I'm 20 years old, thinking, hey, I still want to be this pediatric neurosurgeon, any type of legal issues, might not be able to practice. Completely backed away from it. So I even transitioned to that point, had to force myself to go back home because of complications with other health issues, fast-tracked because of all these STDs and STIs, fast-tracked to me living with Crohn's and also psoriatic arthritis. Then I was just like, well, what do I do now? I want to be this neurosurgeon, didn't know what to do. I was like, let's just go to school. Let's do psychology. It's close enough. Y'all have a psychology program. Found out this BS in psychology was truly a BS degree, a bullshit degree. Could not do anything with it.
Listen, I have a BS in psychology too, bruh. No, I actually, maybe I have a BA,
I have
which
a
is even
BA, it's
worse.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, it's even worse. It's even worse. Literally, the only thing that my degree is good for is like psychoanalyzing the idiots at the Capitol.
And you try to get a job with that, and they'll tell you that. Be like, oh, baby, oh, you thought you were doing something. Congratulations on graduating. You completed a milestone, but that is all you've done. So I was like, oh, crap. Went back to school, got a master's in social work. And after that, really got back into advocacy. Like with my own trauma, I was like, we're going to step away from it. Let's not go back through it. And through different fellowships, through different programs, it got to a point where just like, I do not want other people to have to go through everything I went through, from the stigma, the isolation, the mental health issues, the threats, baby, no. And that's where I got involved and thankfully attended this wonderful training called HIV is Not a Crime. The academy training is held biannually and really just started from there, learning about HIV decriminalization efforts nationally and then learned about it even globally. After that, I was plugged in, good to go, and that's why we're here now.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories. I mean, it's so brave and it's so important. And we're so grateful to have both of you doing this work. And I have also learned a ton from you, Dietz. Like, I really didn't know much about this issue at all before Lyft started working in coalition on the decriminalization bill. And it is really heartbreaking the way that that law has been used to target people.
Yeah.
And LCCH has led the effort to try to repeal the HIV criminalization law. And there's been some interesting steps. And I think that y'all's approach has been something that we can really relate to, Ellie, with our work, because we know what the ultimate goal is. And we also know that we need to take some incremental steps to get there sometimes. So I'd be interested, Dietz, in you giving us a little bit of a summary of some of the work that y'all have done over the past few years to try to repeal this law and address some of the issues that the barriers that you've been running into along the journey.
For sure. So, we were mostly a volunteer organization up until 2022 when we got our first funding to get a little more organized. And when we had more capacity, we were like, okay, well, what can we do now? And we were really aware that the knowledge of HIV was probably pretty low at the legislative level, that most of our legislators probably didn't understand HIV transmission at a base level, prevention on another level, and treatment on another level, kind of like all of those three very separate but crucial things to understand in order to have an educated conversation about anything to do with HIV, let alone something that you could carry such severe criminal penalties. We knew that education was going to have to be the first step for us to have a cogent conversation. So we decided to use a study resolution first. We decided to try and do a study before we introduced a bill. And I will say this was deeply controversial within our coalition, because people were like, we already have the data. We have the science. We have everything. Like, why study something that we've studied so hard? But we recognized that what could come out of that was a legislative report that had state-sanctioned recommendations for how to update the law, which is more powerful than us just like being like, here's the data. Don't you agree? Here's the science. Isn't this compelling? Here are the people. Doesn't your heart do anything in your chest? We knew that if we had like a formal tool, we would be able to move with a little more power when we
just like to comment on that briefly, then yeah, like I hear that because there's a real problem at our legislature, and I think this is true, a lot of places and on the federal level now, that like valid and good science and data is just totally discounted. It doesn't matter like how much you tell them this is from, this organization, this association, things that like in any other space, people would be like, oh yeah, like literally all the experts, all the medical experts, all the mental health experts, all of them agree on this. They're like, nah, we think that those organizations are woke. We think it's fake data. Yeah. So yeah, you got to like repackage it. Like the Department of Health, our Department of Health did this. Yeah. I think that's smart, and unfortunately, you're right, like necessary, like to meet them where they are, where they can hopefully like discount less, what is like objectively known in the expert medical community to be true.
Yeah. And it gave us an opportunity to do a really deep education with the people who we appointed to the task force. We recommended that there be a representative from health and welfare, even though this would be a criminal bill that would inevitably go through criminal justice instead. We had someone from criminal justice. We had a representative from the Louisiana District Attorneys Association, and we had people with lived experience, and we had me, and we had the director of the STD HIV program at the health department, Dr. Sam Burgess. He was the chair of the task force. So we had a pretty powerful collection of people in space, and we really used that time. Concurrently, LCCH was conducting community-based research. We went throughout the entire state. We went to all 9 public health regions and held focus groups with people who were living with HIV to have them tell us about how the law had impacted their lives, even if they never touched a courtroom. Because what I knew from the work that I had done and my friends and family members who are living with HIV, that the vast majority of violence that happens because of this law isn't what happens in the courtroom. It's not for the people who are actually charged. It's for the people who, again, wind up finding themselves in coercive and violent situations where they're being blackmailed because they followed the law. Because, once you tell someone your status, they can use it against you. If you don't tell someone your status, you're breaking the law. If you tell someone your status and you can't really thoroughly document it, then anyone could use it against you. So it really leaves people who are living with HIV in this completely catch-22 type of space. So we really wanted to get the time to educate the legislature about this. So we brought that information from our community research. We made a report. We got it done fast, even though we went to all nine regions. So we did a lot of work, but we got them that report fast to use in the study. And then November, we were supposed to wrap up in 2023. And then the Louisiana Districts Association swapped out the person who had been at every single one of our meetings and replaced that judge with the executive director of the Louisiana Districts Association. So she had originally, this circuit judge from Lafayette Roya Butsani, had been with us for all of our meetings. The very last one where we were supposed to approve the report, here comes Zach Daniels, saying, this is garbage. We'll never approve this. There's no way. They had had no dissent before, no dialogue, no discussion.
Wow.
They're like, we can't do this. We're going to file a minority report. And he held up the release of the report so that it was released 3 days before session started in 2024. So we were planning on having a full 4 months where we could use the report from the study to educate the Criminal Justice Committee. We were already set up with Representative Amy Freeman to move a bill. This was part of our plan, study resolution, educate, introduce a bill, see what happens. But he delayed it up until 3 days before session started. The District Attorneys Association delayed it. And ultimately they did dissent, but they did not submit a minority report, and we still had majority to report it. So at least we can still say we had that tool, but because we hadn't been able to utilize it once, even though we tried to disseminate it as best as we can, no one's got time for a legislative report once session starts. That's not a real thing. You can't get even a staffer's attention for long enough to explain that. So we did our best, but it did not take long on the floor to see that the conversation was not anywhere near as informed as we would need to not potentially run the risk of the bill becoming even more harmful during the amendment process. So we petitioned Representative Freeman to pull it, and we did. It was harrowing. There were lots of tears shed. There was some political strategy that we were encouraged towards by our legislative champion that ultimately really failed us, and we learned a lot about the vetting process for choosing a legislative champion, about what our criteria was for someone actually being capable and ready and willing to give this nuanced issue the attention and detail that it needs to have from a legislative champion. It can't just be someone who's like, I think this is a good idea. I hear where you're coming from. It's too complicated. And so we kind of turned that into a moment to take a break. We were going to try and take a breather this session and really build those relationships, push out HR 130, do the good groundwork of setting ourselves up to introduce legislation next year. And then here comes HB 76.
Right.
And we side quested. So then we were on the defense for the last couple months, but I'm going to stop talking. That's kind of how we got to where we are today.
That's super helpful. I mean, and you cannot answer this because I'm always don't know if I want to reveal too much strategy, but do you think next session's a substantive session? Are you guys thinking about maybe working towards proposing bill again next session?
At this point, yes, but we will see, because the new elements that HB 76 introduces with different disease states that are very, very different in terms of communicability, in terms of transmission, in terms of prevention. Like, if these other disease states are now being forced into the conversation, our strategy has to look different if we want to protect people more than just folks who are living with HIV. So we can get into that in the details if you want. But yeah, we're pretty sure we're going to move forward, but we have to kind of reassess everything where we know what that next step is going to look like.
So I guess then follow up would be sort of leading into the like shit now there's a proposal that would be extremely regressive. Then can you just tell us briefly what the bill that y'all proposed like last session, what it would have done? Or what the goals were?
Yeah. So when we're just talking HIV right now the law is just for exposure. For those of you just listening, heavy scare quotes. Exposure means everything and nothing. Like, what the actual language of the law says is exposure through any means or contact. So that means that sex doesn't even have to have happened. Y'all mentioned last week, I listened to the podcast last week, that biting or spitting, even though we've known that HIV can't be transmitted via spit since the 90s. Our coalition supported a gentleman just this year who was incarcerated for 8 months behind a bite when he was being viciously beaten by security guards while houseless, BTW.
Wow.
He was just literally defending himself, and he was incarcerated for 8 months, even though he had to be moved from 2 separate hospitals because those people beat him so badly just because he wanted to go get his stuff from an abandoned parking garage. So when we say any means or contact, this isn't like they don't use it that way that often. We have unfortunate proof about how indiscriminately these laws are used when it's just exposure. So our original bill was to at least require transmission because HIV is actually not that easy of a virus to contract. People have a lot of misconceptions about that. Of all of the cases that we're aware of people who've been charged with HIV exposure and heavy scare quotes, only 2 or 3 have ever resulted in transmission. So if we could make it transmission, if that alone could get in, we'd close the door on it being able to be used against almost everybody coercively. But when we're talking about HPV, HSV, herpes, some of the most easily communicable diseases of any kind, let alone whether it be sexual or like just social, like we would be allowing transmission isn't the fix there for the picture, right? But for our other bill, the other thing we were really focused on is getting a specific definition of intent. Because even though the bill in and of itself says intentional exposure to HIV, they link intention to consent, whether or not someone told someone that they were living with HIV. But because we know people who are on effective HIV medication cannot transmit HIV to somebody else, why would we force disclosure of a health status that poses no risk to somebody, especially if upon disclosing that they were living with that health status, someone could immediately turn around and criminalize them? It's just but people who look at this law from the outside just see but bad people, again, heavy scare quotes, bad people who are on purpose, transmitting HIV to other people should be punished. Well, number one, that almost never actually happens. And in the small instances of times where it does happen, our coalition believes that carceral responses are still not going to be the thing that keeps us safer at the end of the day. But, abolition is a pathway forward that's going to take a lot of work for us to get there. For now, we at least want the law to get so narrow that it only impacts the people who are successfully, intentionally, maliciously transmitting HIV, which would require a new definition of intent because they just use the same old criminal intent definition, but we don't criminalize any other health condition. So the definition doesn't work in the same kind of way. We need a specific definition that includes malicious intent. We need to actually define that in order for people not to have it just be used coercively against them behind someone saying, you didn't tell me your status and prove that you didn't. Prove it.
Yeah, well, we're going to obviously get into this with HB 76, but this just highlights just my ongoing repeated and deep frustration with our lawmakers that they'll find an isolated couple of incidents about something that something bad that happened where a lot of the time I don't even believe that those facts have been vetted and are necessarily true, right? So there's that. But assuming that there's 1 or 2 isolated incidents, and I'm talking about with a law like this or with the coerced abortion law that we're going to talk about later, that a few isolated incidents, and so then the bill that's proposed is is so broad, so ridiculously broad that, like, sure, I guess it would solve the problem of the one or two things that you guys have uncovered that may or may not be true. But in the meantime, is also going to cause like untold problems and criminalization on like a whole host of different issues. So like the exact opposite, of course, of like what government is supposed to do, like with a narrowly tailored solution. That's like constantly, we have a problem, we see a problem, here's our solution.
Yeah, and it's
throw everybody in jail, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Exactly.
The same with like with the parental consent, for healthcare bill, like we've talked about, like, like let's require parental consent for all healthcare because we think that there's some issues that should require that. Like, again, like the instances that they want to focus on are always problematic, but like, the lack of like just sort of common sense, I think, about tailoring solutions even to the problems that you guys are claiming exist is like just it's incredibly frustrating and it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah. DeKeitra, I'm so curious if you have something to add to this, because one of the other things that we really wanted to focus on in the original bill that we did last year was removing the requirement for sexual offender registry. Because right now, if you're charged, it's 15 years on the sexual offender registry.
That's insane.
And I'm saying this as a survivor myself. The sexual offender registry is a myth of safety, right? What it is an extension of the police surveillance state. Because if we actually think about people who are true perpetrators, or the vast majority of people who are charged for HIV criminalization are not sexual perpetrators. Some may be. The vast majority, according to our data and our research, is that they are not. This is mostly domestic violence stuff. But if we're considering only sexual assault perpetrators, people who make bad choices, what on earth makes us think that we could put them through prison and then once they get out, strip them from all of the resources that help us live well, make sure that they can't get jobs easily, make sure that they're pushed out to the way far corners of our communities so that they can't get back into town, that they're not allowed to like be around anyone in their community anymore. What would make that person behave better? What on earth would make someone who is already making bad decisions make better decisions when we take away everything from them and then force them to pay or send them back to jail? As a survivor of sexual assault, I don't feel safer knowing that that's our solution for putting people who do harmful things back out into the world, that's our answer. And I know that there's like conflicting attitudes about this, but LCCH stands pretty firmly that like this being a tier 1 sex offense is one of the things that actively works against survivors. It does not help reduce reperpetration. That is a myth. And we don't have data that shows us that the sexual offender registry actually minimizes reperpetration. DeKeitra, I know that you've been in our coalition as people talk about this, so I'm super curious if you have something you want to add to that.
Just think about the sex offender registry in general. You already talked about social determinants of health being impacted behind this. Turn around and look like other people we've seen their life completely flip, where it's just like, oh, I've done 5, maybe 10 years in this state. I'm ready to move. Like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm sick of it, or I just want a fresh start. If you don't look at the new state or whatever state you're moving into, the law in Louisiana doesn't follow you there. So if the other state says 20 years, 25 years, you're like, oh, I've done my 10. I only have 5 more. I'm ready to move wherever. That next state says, oh, no, baby, you need to do 25. So you're like, wait a minute. And then it's just a repeating cycle. Well, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't, for a health status, for a health issue. Like, where's the public health in this? Where's the human rights in this? It doesn't exist. The lawmakers are just like, oh, the problem is solved. We got that off our back. No, you didn't. If anything, you created more issues because now this person cannot get a job or cannot get a stable job, has to live somewhere else outside of the norm. It's just like, the life I had, you have stripped me of. Now I need more resources. I'm coming to these social organizations because I need assistance. So it's like, granted, from a sex offender registry, I'm having to pay for this, but I'm also paying to get the services that I need.
In general, then the sex offender registry issue is a problem. It is very, very broad in terms of what qualifies someone for having to be on that list, and it is incredibly problematic. That's a broader topic, but yeah, it's again with sort of like, as we said last week, some of these things I think have well-meaning intent. And I think there's some well-meaning intent with the sex offender registry. And, it may have a place in which it's useful for in narrow ways.
Certain crimes, right? Certain crimes, but not this one.
No, not at all.
And not many. I mean,
Right.
there are many that many crimes that a person then ends up on having to register that should not. I mean, statutory rape. You know, you were 19, the girl was 16. I mean, just a lot of shit. That's like, yeah. Anyway.
Well, I want to get into the hearing on HB 76 a little bit because, of course, they waited till the very end of the schedule to hear this bill, which they do pretty frequently, and they limited testimony to 3 minutes, which is very common. I think that's pretty standard in Vilio's hearing room, which is the Criminal Injustice Committee, as we've quipped it here. So we have some clips to play. The first one so Representative Moore came to the table and she talked about how she had talked to a lot of people that were opposed to the bill, and yet she was very committed to the bill. So I want to play that and then allow you both to react to that.
I do not apologize. I will make that clear. I do not apologize for bringing this bill. Since I filed the bill, I've had many persons to call me that support the bill, and many of the persons have called me that have opposed the bill. You and I both have received numerous emails, phone calls regarding HB 76, and that's okay, because this is why we have committee meetings. This is why we give the people a chance to voice their opinion. So I welcome all of those that are here today regarding HB 76, whether they oppose the bill or support the bill. I want them to know I did listen to them. I heard them.
So, yeah.
But DeKeitra.
She was pretty defiant. Yeah. I mean, just that being sort of the opening of the bill, what were y'all thinking at that?
I'm going to say, for me, we came from a place of privilege. Like, we were able to have a conversation with Representative Moore already. So we already understood where she was coming from. So even in this clip, nothing was shocking. Like, in her mind, she really feels like, I'm helping survivors. This bill is going to help other people so that situations of potential transmission, I'm going to say that, does not happen further. But knowing the insights, even with the bill itself, the language within it, this is really a bad, hurtful, harmful bill to people, regardless of their status, regardless of their sexual health status. So in hearing her, yes, I get her point where it's like, I really feel like as a representative, I'm doing what I need to do. I'm not going to fault anyone for that.
Yeah. And I think that what was challenging is that there were people on both sides that had horrific experiences and had contracted infections, contracted disease from their experiences. Nobody was in agreement on the solution to that, right? And so she was sort of taking one side, and she had brought two women with her that were at the table in that clip that, they told really upsetting stories. And I have a clip to play of them because I don't want to be just completely one-sided as we're having this conversation. But I think that in a lot of ways, what they're saying is a problem and what y'all are saying is a problem are actually the same.
Yes.
It's just what they want is not really the solution. So let me play that one and then we can go back and talk a little bit more.
My mother, a retired teacher, contracted a lifelong STD from an unfaithful spouse. And I, after 5 years in what I believed was a faithful relationship and Catholic marriage, became severely ill. ER visits, allergists, dermatologists, steroid shots, prescriptions, bladder prolapse, pelvic floor therapy. My husband attended appointments, rejected STD testing, reassuring doctors we were monogamous. Eventually, I found evidence of infidelity with a man.
On August 26, 2024, I went before the New Orleans City Council's Criminal Justice Committee to speak about my personal story in which I was exposed to HIV by my former partner, Warren Murphy III, who is now incarcerated in Orleans Parish Prison thanks to Louisiana Revised Statute 43.5, making it a crime to intentionally expose an individual without disclosing your status and gaining consent prior to sex.
Really painful. I self-disclose I'm a survivor of sexual assault. And so I don't know what either of those women's experience is like, but I know what my experience was like, was that I was so active in my trauma that I couldn't even imagine what the future looked like. Like, I didn't know what future Dietz was going to, like, how I was going to move through the world, or even if I was even going to survive, you know, like the violence that I experienced, that I wasn't going to die by suicide because what I experienced was so horrific. I couldn't see my future self, but it's been my job in LCCH to listen to the stories of people, of the future selves of survivors, right? People who maybe contracted HIV from a sexual assault, who are now experiencing the unimaginable injustice of following the law and then someone trying to use a law about intentional exposure to HIV against them. Those women can't see or feel their future selves. And, you know, It's interesting. We actually have data about this. About 75% of people nationally who are living with HIV don't think these laws are ever going to really impact them. Like, if you ask them, do you think someone's ever going to try and use these laws against you? Most people are like, nah, no, totally not. But if you ask that same group of people, we've got data, I'm happy to link this for y'all if y'all want to look at the data later, the Zero Project does it. They're like, but if someone did do it, do you think that even if you had proof that a court of law would hear you, and do you think you would get a fair trial? It's like 87% are like, nah, absolutely not. So, and you know, in my experience doing this as a direct service worker, nobody was like, oh yeah, I thought this was going to happen to me. Like, nobody thinks that they're going to be criminalized until you're in front of it and having to deal with it. So I can respect and understand that their trauma is too alive to imagine the future. But as a survivor, I don't want to see any survivor getting re-traumatized. Why would we build a system that we know has these holes in it? They don't know it. They don't know better. That's okay. That's okay. It's our job now to talk to them to make sure they understand it, so that like when we're not creating a world where this could be used against people after they've already experienced trauma.
Yeah, I think that really good point. I think it goes to sort of like that, as you were talking about before, the language of these laws. And I'm sure that most people, if asked, would be like, well, I would never intentionally expose someone. So I would never intentionally do that. So of course I would never be charged or find myself, you know, on the wrong end of these laws. But not understanding, as you were saying before, intent in the law is always an issue in all circumstances. Proving what intent was is fact specific and difficult. But in situations like this, a lot of the issue too is about whether the intent to engage in the conduct. This is true with all the shit that all the abortion laws do. Like, you know that you are engaging in the conduct, which is performing the procedure that could be called an abortion, or, you know, you're engaging in sex, you're engaging in that conduct. You intended to do that. So there's some intentionality, but you didn't intend the result being that you would be exposed, or the result being that I am performing an abortion. So those are like very complicated issues in the law that have to do with like specific intent and general intent. But like, people don't really realize that like intent is it's not just like in your brain what you thought. It can mean many things. That just the only intent necessary is that you took an act. You did a thing that resulted then in this thing, if that makes sense. Again, because intent is it's very complicated. But yeah, I'm assuming that's what most of these people would say is like, well, I would never intentionally do this.
Right. I actually pulled a clip from the criminal defense attorney that spoke as well, and we'll play that in a minute. But you testified at the hearing, and I have a little mashup of y'all's testimony.
I've personally had to hold the hands of too many people, innocent people, who have had this law used against them, even when they told the truth, even when they followed the law. Before I worked for LCCH, I was a patient navigator for folks who were newly diagnosed with HIV. And part of what I was supposed to do was tell them the good stuff, that they could take medications that meant they could never transmit it to somebody else, that they could live exactly as long as anyone who wasn't living with HIV because our meds had come so far. But it was also my responsibility to explain to them that for the rest of their lives, for every new person they had sex with, they would have to tell them their status and document it. This was especially hard when I was talking to people who had contracted HIV as a result of sexual violence. I met the first woman, but who wouldn't be the last woman who I met, who was entrapped in a domestic violence relationship because she had followed the law. And every time she tried to leave, he said, well, if you leave, I'm going to tell the cops you never told me your status. Even if she had proof, even if she went to court, she was the one who was living with HIV, and who was going to believe her over him? The loopholes in the language of the law can easily coerce people. We have concerns that there's no way to amend this bill to a good place because the existing bill has challenges. Proving that you had sex at all is challenging. Proving that you disclosed your status is challenging. And even if you were to have proof in your hand, even if someone were to write it down, What if someone ripped it up? What if you lost it? And because of the way that the court system works, because this is a felony and a sex offense, you're going to go to jail for at least 60 days while the district attorney decides whether or not they're going to hear your case. And because it's a felony and because it's a sex offense, bail is going to be set at a rate that most people won't probably be able to get to. So even if you had proof, someone could still ruin your life and send you away for 2 months.
It's nerve-wracking to testify. And Dietz, I know you're kind of an old pro at it at this point, but DeKeitra, can you talk a little bit about your experience testifying, like what it's like to prepare to do that, to sit there and wait for all these other people to speak, you know, when we're prepared.
That we've been talking about, you know, where it's like either the shit that's being said is like so not true and like not fact-based, or it's very emotional stories which like are very real lived things for the people saying them but are not representative of the problem or the solution. Having sat through many of things waiting for that, I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings of general malaise about it.
Sure. So just knowing as an advocate in general, comparing it to like most people like, oh, well, let's do a Hill day or let's do Hill visits. I've gone to DC multiple times, gone and had meetings with representatives or senators in their offices. Totally different when you have a whole committee sitting there and you're like my prime example. In terms of testimony, I was literally the last person to give a testimony before Representative Moore came back and was like, okay, well, here's my final say-so on it. So literally to hear everyone from start to finish and then say, oh, well, now it's your turn, and to compile it where, okay, we've heard from other survivors. I'm also a survivor of trauma, and then have to feel that story. I already knew, okay, let's write it down, read literally off, read from it. Do not try to have it, memorize it. You're going to mess up. So I was like, just read it and go from there. So in that moment, knowing that I was going to read from it, I said, oh, this is perfect. We are fine. We're good to go. But even in that moment, I was like, okay, now it's your turn to speak. I was like, okay, can I get like 5 seconds to go? And I just sat there and I was like, we don't have 5 seconds. The timer is ticking. Let's read and go. So for me, it was like, oh, this timer is ticking. I just saw somebody else that ran over their time. Do not run over your own time. And all that was playing before I even got started. So even in the clip, it's like maybe 10 seconds, but all this is rapidly going through my brain where it's like, get through it, say what you have to do, and keep going.
It's so true.
I'm a survivor of date rape. A group of men violated my trust, my body, and my humanity at age 20. That trauma changed my life, and I now live with HIV and herpes, both HSV1 and HSV2. Not because I was reckless, but because I was assaulted. For people like me, for survivors, disclosure doesn't always feel safe, and this bill doesn't account for that. It'll push people away from care, silence those living with viral STIs, and give power to those who want to weaponize our health status against us. Ultimately, survivors deserve healing and not handcuffs.
It was really powerful that your testimony was the last testimony. And I'm not, you know, sometimes you can't plan that when you go, and especially not in that hearing room. But I thought it was really powerful.
But I totally relate to the nerve-wrackingness of like of the time limit, and particularly with Rep. Villio, who is like, I mean, you know, you're lucky if she'll let you like finish your sentence if the 3 minutes has, you know, elapsed. And 3 minutes is not, you know, and Michelle and I've talked about this. I mean, there's times that I understand why they're doing that. There can be lots of people to testify. Some things that people are saying is insane, you know, and they could go on and on for like hours if you know, if permitted. But in general, it's very frustrating, and it's often used to disenfranchise opposition voices, you know, the dissent, like where I have like a bunch of relevant things to say that like honestly these people should hear, and it's really like not possible to get it into the 3 minutes. So it's just another like sort of flaw with the process that, you know, they don't care, but it's a problem. It's a real problem.
And we tried to do good old-fashioned coalition strategy, organizing 101. We did a lot of collective gathering to be like, who's got which talking point? We tried to really like, you're talking about this one talking point. Don't talk about 5. You've got this one talking point. Like we really tried to go through and like make sure that each person's voice had the story and the piece of this that would let them know, again, this very complex issue has all of these things that someone until they were in it could never know. They could never know it. And most of this stuff stays underground because of the way that stigma and shame about sexual assault and domestic violence and intimate partner violence happen. Like we aren't good at talking about these things. So it's hard to talk about on a good day, let alone in a committee room. Like it's brutal. So we really did try and like set our people up. We had them writing out testimonies to 3 minutes, try and do it for 2, like pivot. Like we tried to do the thing. And then there was hail and tornadoes and, like it was a tough day. We had multiple people who were coming up to testify, including doctors and attorneys who made it halfway and had to turn around because the weather was so bad. So I'm really proud of us that we were able to turn out in the way that we did, even though the weather was inclement, even though it's hard to talk about anyway.
Yeah.
And it's tough to ask people to dig it up. It's really tough to ask people to dig it up. We try to take care of
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, no doubt. It just also, it's like bringing back PTSD from all of these things that like I've organized our side for, including upcoming ones. But yeah, the frustration too is like as a lawyer, then yeah, we've done the same thing. I'm trying to get, you're going to talk about this, you're going to talk about this, you're going to talk about this. But then with some of these committees, including Rep. Vilio often, where like there's an order in which this would make the most sense. If you will let me just say, can you please let so-and-so talk first, right, and then so-and-so, and then so-and-so, then like this will all flow and make more sense. And sometimes they will do that, but often they just like will just refuse to do that for no reason other than that they're just like they just are being jerks.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, there someone from the CD, what is it, Ellie, the Criminal Defense Attorneys Group?
The LACDL, Louisiana Association of Criminal Defense, attorneys, defense lawyers.
Yeah, so he came and spoke, and I thought that what he said was really interesting about how defenses for these cases are extremely challenging, and then he also talked about how other existing laws that could be used to prosecute. What we're saying, the most egregious cases of intentional exposure. So I did want to play that clip, and then I want to talk about just the criminalization in general idea.
On behalf of LACDL, just really, really quickly, I have 3 points I wanted to make that we have concerns about the bill as criminal defense lawyers. First of all, I think that the discovery that we would need to do to be doing our jobs as defense lawyers would involve a lot of invasiveness into these the victims' medical records, and that goes back to the issue of who gave what to whom. And I think that's part of the problem when the law tries to criminalize a health status instead of dealing with these real problems in another way. And so as I was sitting there, I was thinking the testimony that we heard is heart-wrenching. I think that if you look at the laws that are on the books, I don't know why that wouldn't qualify as a second-degree battery. The witness who testified that she went to the DA's office and they told her, we can't prosecute this. But I do think that there's some creativity that can be engaged in by DA's offices to appropriately prosecute real wrongs that happen to victims in this state under the laws that already exist in this state. TAG, which gets you a 6-person jury. So in some of the subsections, you're looking at 25 years as a mandatory minimum, and I believe the other ones go as high as 15 or even 20.
Yeah, just like lawyer reaction real quick. This is something that like I'm saying all the time there. This goes back to there are narrow incidents of somebody doing something wrong. And nearly in all of those cases, then there is an existing criminal law that could already be used. Like we have a lot of things like, as soon as you start going, it's like, yeah, like battery. I mean, there's a lot of general criminal laws that prohibit somebody doing something physically to you where they're intending harm. So yeah, I think it's always a good point. And if prosecutors are unwilling to prosecute that, that's a different issue. That's because they are not they don't give a shit about victims of this harm, not because our laws aren't broad enough that would allow for somebody to be punished for real wrongdoing.
I think it also highlights a real paradox and contradiction in LCCH's work, because we don't think these laws should exist, right? Again, because ultimately we believe even if somebody is intentionally transmitting HIV, that criminalizing them isn't going to make them less likely to do that in the future. Because if punishment worked as a response to bad behavior, we would live in a vastly different society right now. So we already believe that carceral responses don't work, though we know from other states that have completely repealed, have not amended their laws, that have completely repealed criminal law or civil law, winds up getting used in these really dangerous ways. Like, people's bodies being called biohazardous weapons.
Wow.
So when there's not a criminal code that actually addresses that very narrow, very rarely true instance of someone intentionally, successfully, maliciously transmitting HIV, if we don't have that law at all, then it just really opens the civil doors in a way that can do the exact same kind of creative violence against people who are living with HIV. So that's why we're not calling for repeal. And that's work that we have to do, that political education with all of our coalition members, because they're like, well, why the hell don't you just get rid of it? Like, if it's so violent, why have it at all? And that's part of the reason why we need a law that's so narrow. Though, again, it's so nuanced that if we were to add additional disease states to the existing law, which is ultimately what Moore wanted to do, she started off with a really wacky law that actually had a lot of very specific additional heightened penalties that the defense lawyer mentioned. And also some really wild shit, like lifelong ankle monitoring at the cost of the person. And when we're talking about young people, you really want to do that? Is that really what you think? I don't know. It's just, it's tough. But ultimately, she thought this was an amendment that we would be thrilled with. When we spoke to her, she was like, nah, we're just going to use the existing law and we're just going to tack herpes, HSV, and HPV to it. Aren't you stoked? And we were like, nah, no, absolutely not. Our whole coalition exists because the existing law is so bad. We've got legislative tools that explain and outline how bad it is. We don't want to add more to what's already bad. So we do have to have that law, because otherwise, again, all of these civil things can come into place, even though we don't ultimately agree with any of it in the first place.
Yeah. So, this kind of does get to an important question, which is, what other measures would you suggest to address the issue of malicious intentional exposure without resorting to criminalization and to incarceration?
And to the narrow extent that it exists. Yeah.
What you got, DeKeitra?
Just thinking more so from a public health standpoint, if you're criminalizing someone, that automatically does not equate to now they're going to get effective treatment. Especially, if you're in prison, good luck getting medication. Let's start there. Right. So you're talking about, let's criminalize them for this. Their health is still a concern, or should be a concern. So potentially create systems where it's just look, we need to ensure that you go to your appointments, maybe not necessarily, and I hate to use this comparison, but I think about drug courts, where a lot of time you have to go to some type of treatment. We have to show documentation that you're going to some type of treatment. Similar situation. Okay, we know you have this STD specifically. We know that according to we're not even going to throw medical cases into this, but are you effectively being treated? Or are you seeing treatment? Are you on treatment? These areas within itself, we know the likelihood, even data shows and supports, if they're on treatment, they're more educated. They're going to turn around and have these conversations with other people. So sexual health becomes a part of their life. Sexual health is their health. Whereas before it's I'm not concerned, or I don't even know. I haven't been tested. I don't know what sexual health is. I don't know. Look, I know I like sex. I engage in sex. That's my sexual health, as opposed to, wait a minute, do you have any STDs? Have you ever had any STIs? What do you enjoy doing? What can serve as less vulnerable type of sex? That is a problem. It goes back to education, but also from the public health standpoint, ensuring that testing, treatment, and also prevention is at every single level and is equitable for every single person, regardless of income, regardless of education, regardless of race, gender, sexual minority status.
I think it's really interesting that the diversion comparison to with drug court, so that if someone is charged, right, if there is probable cause to believe that somebody has broken the law in terms of intentional exposure, that rather than sending that person to jail, then you send them to diversion, which is basically treatment, right? And that would be, I think in this situation would be both probably some mental health treatment and then actual physical health treatment. That would make a lot of sense.
Well, and also, I think it's really important that we draw the distinction here that from our awareness, most of the cases that have been prosecuted against this are not sexual assault cases.
Right.
So there is this immediate conflation that these charges are only used in the way that the literal title of the law looks like it would, when it actually doesn't. I think it's an important thing to say on this podcast. 11% of all charges are pressed by police officers. Mm-hmm. You can only get HIV, for those of you who are unsure, listeners, from having sex with someone with detectable viral load using no protection, or from sharing an intravenous needle. Now, if any law enforcement agent were to admit to doing that behavior, we would have a whole other conversation. And yet 11% of all charges. Within the last month, I've talked to somebody who was charged while he was incarcerated because he got into a scuffle. He spat on the floor. Now he's living with an aggravated felony with 15 years on the sexual offender registry. So there is this really, I think it's really important that we separate charges right away. But when we think about sexual harm in our state, correct me if I'm wrong, first-degree rape is lifetime in prison with no opportunity for parole. So we already have highly extreme measures. I don't know what you could add to that. Lifetime of incarceration without parole, for what? To what end?
That's exactly what I meant. We have all the laws. I say this all the time. We incarcerate more people in Louisiana than it used to be than anywhere in the world. And I think we're maybe second. I don't know. It's an insane amount of people. We have all the laws. There's not a thing that is happening here that we could not find a law to send someone to jail. We don't need more laws that are broad and vague and then instead end up like you're talking about, either where then they're being used punitively by DAs and cops to just add other fucking charges to make it more likely a person's going to plead and actually go to jail, or as y'all were talking about before, that can be weaponized by just fucking private people who in your life who know things about you that people who you thought you could trust, basically. So we don't the things that are happening that are legitimately bad, there's a lot of ways to send people to jail. Hands down.
But I think it comes down to a bigger issue. When we are talking about violence, sexual violence, we have one tool, which is carceral response. We give survivors nothing else to address their feelings of injustice, their feeling of hurt, their feeling of pain. When you say, here's a sledgehammer and it's the only tool you can use, of course, people will reach for the sledgehammer every time, no matter if they needed a needle, no matter if they needed a scalpel. We're just going to wind up with huge fucking holes everywhere because that's the one tool that we're offered people. When we're thinking about when people have really experienced intentional, malicious harm, I think our communities need to come together to figure out a better way to address this. Because again, as a survivor, only speaking for myself, my perpetrator had to go through the carceral system. I knew my perpetrator. I knew that shit wasn't going to make him act any different when he got out. I knew that wasn't going to change whether or not he ever perpetrated again. I did not feel confident about that. Even as a young person, I felt like I had that kind of awareness. So we need better solutions that address behavior. Behavior and then behavior after the behavior has happened. But that doesn't happen in prison. It does not happen in prison. So
our system, it's solely based on retribution. That's just the deal. It is not based on rehabilitation, even though there's some bullshit, lip service that's given to that. It's not. So we're not trying to actually change people who have done something wrong. And we're for sure not trying to give the people who were harmed any sort of support or solution other than retribution.
Well, it goes back to what we were saying at the very beginning, which is the mindset of the religious people in the state who are controlling state government is vengeance. It is fire and brimstone. And I think our criminal code reflects that in a lot of ways.
Lastly, we need to say what happened with the bill and the good news. What happened with the bill?
Sorry. Yes, that's 100% correct. Okay. So what happened with the bill?
Go for it, DeKeitra. Tell them.
So Representative Moore voluntarily deferred the bill and stated if opposition and those that are for, collectively, she wants to hear from people by Tuesday for efforts. But ultimately, her decision is if we cannot come to a cohesive decision, she is not willing to bring forward this bill. Those were her exact words on record.
Maybe dead.
I want to say that we're making good on our promises too. We care about those women. We approach them afterwards in compassion, being like, what happened to you was wrong, but we're actually on the same side. We just don't want you to get hurt again. And let's talk. So we've told Representative Moore, and this is our messaging from the coalition, that we don't believe that if we're going to do the due diligence that survivors deserve to really be heard out and be in discussion, we can't do that with what's left of time in session. We can't do that. Not if she really meaningfully cares about solutions. So we're asking her to keep it deferred, not to bring it back, but to come back with us. And we are going to follow up with those survivors. They might not want to say anything to us, and that's okay. But we care about actual solutions. It's not just our issue we're the right ones, get on our side or get out of here. We welcome dissent within our coalition because these issues are complex. Have to think about things dynamically if we're going to come to solutions. That's what this democracy system is supposed to be about. Whether or not it plays out that way, we want to play the game the way that we want to play, the way we want people to play with us. So we're gonna make good with our promises. And if you're someone who's listening who wants to get involved with LCCH, we want you on our team to think about this too. Come to our website, sign up for our email list. It's www.lacch.org. Follow us on Instagram, Stigma Isn't Justice at Louisiana, LA. Come join us because we need everyone's minds and hands at the table to address this.
Well, I just want to congratulate y'all too. I mean, I appreciate all of that. And I think it's really like, inspiring and moving about how you want to move forward. But I want to congratulate you guys on a win because as we know, those don't happen all the time. That's a tough committee. This is a tough issue. You guys did the work. You came, you represented the voices of the people that needed to be heard. The committee had a lot of skepticism. The bill author heard it, and it was a good day. Congrats. We got to take the wins where we can get them.
And the sun started shining after the bill was deferred.
100%. 100%. Thank you both so much. This was such a great conversation. I'm so glad y'all were willing to do this on a Saturday. And we'll link all of the information that you provided in the show notes so that people can follow up. And hopefully we could have you back for another discussion of a win.
Round 2.
That's right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Be well.
All right. Let's talk about what happened with House Bill 425 this week. Ellie, the bill was amended. They posted the amendments the day before the hearing on Thursday, which is what they're supposed to do. So I'm not going to give them any sort of praise for doing their fucking jobs, but it was good because we had an opportunity to review the amendments and be prepared to come to the hearing understanding exactly what they were trying to do with the bill. So can you tell us a little bit about what the amendments do?
Yeah, so leading into the hearing, so this would it be the day after the bill that we just talked about. So on Thursday in ACJ, then we didn't know going in though whether the amendments that had been posted, who supported them, whether the bill author supported them, whether they would really be adopted or whatnot. But cooler heads apparently did prevail, and the bill author, so Rep. Carlson's, did himself support the amendments and did propose them, and they were all adopted. And so what they do is, so this is the bill that was trying initially to vastly expand the crime of coerced abortion and to add a bunch of shit in terms of mandatory reporting requirements in basically all instances, not just for coerced abortion. So the amendments took out all the crap on mandatory reporting. So no changes are being made to the mandatory reporting law. So that's very helpful. And then on the crime of coerced abortion, then the amendments really significantly narrow what was being proposed. So, as folks will know, before, the way the bill was introduced, then there was like an insane amount of like vague, broad, non-criminal behavior that could have been used to constitute the crime of coerced abortion and to prosecute family members or intimate partners of people who might be considering whether to have an abortion. So the amendments narrow those things to activities, again, that would have to constitute physical force, but physical force, control, or intimidation that then themselves qualify as a crime. So either then the crime of battery, the crime of a false imprisonment, a few other things that, physical force and control or intimidation that, probably were already included in that law, and then also adding extortion, but in the way that crime is defined in our laws. So if you are using extortion to try to compel someone against their will to have an abortion, then you could be prosecuted. So, that was significant in terms of ameliorating the harms of what this bill could be used for. And they were supported by the bill author, and they were adopted. I will say that as you're going to, I think we're going to play the clips, that notwithstanding all of that, then the Right to Life, who was obviously behind the law, then they ran their exact same playbook of what they were going to run to begin with in terms of the testimony that they presented on the bill, which was like a whole bunch of shit about stuff that like does not constitute a crime, that does not fall into any of those categories, including what would not fall into the category of extortion, which themselves they characterize as things that family members are doing to, to quote, pressure somebody or manipulate somebody into having an abortion, which was like exactly like 100% the stuff that we had been saying on the front end would make this law extremely dangerous and, just like could lead to really, really bad consequences for, conversations in families that might be difficult, but shouldn't be criminal.
Yeah. So once the amendments were introduced and adopted, then the conversation kind of turned to this idea about extortion and what exactly that means. There was an exchange between Representative Cox, who is a very conservative, anti-abortion Republican, and he had an interesting question, and I want to play that clip and the exchange between him and the Louisiana Right to Life's new policy director, Erica Enzina, I believe is her name. So let's listen to that.
Rep. Cox. This bill just brings up a lot of scenarios in my mind, and I am pro-life as well, Rep. Carlson, but let's take the scenario of a young woman still living at home, an adult young woman still living at home, sophomore year of college. She gets pregnant, and her parents decide or think that the college education is more important than the pregnancy. And they say that if you don't get an abortion, we're going to cut off your college fund, we're going to make you move out, blah, blah, blah. Would that be considered coercion?
Certainly, if they were to say, if you have this baby, we cannot support you in this house. You're an adult and you have to support yourself and your baby. That's one thing. But if they say, if you don't have an abortion, we're kicking you out, and that they're giving that ultimatum, so to speak, with the intent to compel her to have an abortion knowingly, then yes, they could and probably should be able to be held liable criminally for that.
So this again was like, I really appreciated his question because it went to like the exact type of situations that we have been talking about with this bill that I don't think that people in the general public would think is something that should qualify as behavior that would subject those parents to possibly being sent to jail for 5 years.
Right.
Then, of course, the response from the Right to Life being like, yeah, nah, we think even as amended that, that should qualify as extortion and should send that person to jail for 5 years. And the distinction that, of course, she's making about like, well, if you said it like this, then, that wouldn't count. But if you said it like this, then it would count. It's like, okay, well, that's, again, like, we're really getting into where like there's not a clear line then in this proposal about what is criminal and is not criminal behavior. It should not like hinge on like exactly how you tell your kid about how we as a family are going to move forward about paying for you to go to college and the decision that you're making about whether to carry this pregnancy. Yeah, like she was just like, I'm like, preach to the choir, lady. This is exactly the stuff that like is why y'all's proposal was horrible to begin with, and now you're just like letting me know that it's still a problem. Yeah. In your opinion, the law can still be weaponized in those situations. Good to know.
Well, what was so funny, just an insider view for our listeners, is as soon as that exchange happened, you leaned over to me because we were sitting in the very back of the hearing room, and you were like, I'm going to testify.
We had decided that if the amendments were adopted, that we didn't really need to go to the table, that we would just waive our testimony. And then I was like, oh no, all right, here we go. If this is the way that they're talking about this law, then like we need to talk about what is really going on here.
Yeah. So I want to play the clip of a little bit of your testimony and then an exchange that you had with Representative Bacala.
What we just heard in terms of examples from one of the other women who spoke about language that may be being used by people to pressure or manipulate, which, you know, reasonable people can disagree, of course, about whether that's a nice thing to do, whether that's a moral thing to do. But I don't think that we should disagree that that should not be criminal behavior. Maybe looking at that language that's being specifically added to extortion to try to figure out if we can make that a little bit tighter.
Representative Bacala.
Yes, thank you. Have you guys read, like today, the definition of extortion, 1466? Yes. What part, I mean, most of that, it's a threat to cause harm.
With the amendments, then it would be amending the definition of extortion to add a threat intended to compel a pregnant woman to have an abortion. The hypothetical that was asked before was, do you think it would constitute the crime of extortion as amended here?
So, it was so funny to me because this has actually happened several times over the last couple of years now that all the abortion bills are in the Criminal and Justice Committee in the House. Is Representative Bacala, he kind of loves to challenge you and he'll, interject and he has a question and he thinks he's got a gotcha moment with you, but you're always prepared to be like, actually, no, I do understand what I'm saying and let me explain it to you.
Yeah, well, and I mean, for background for folks, then yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's safe to say that Rep. Bacala is not like a big fan of me. And of course, that being for no other reason that I come to that committee and repeatedly tell them what the consequences will be of the actual language of the bills that they are passing, or what has already happened under the actual language of the bills that they have already passed in terms of the abortion bans. And he wants nothing other than to try to prove that I am being hyperbolic, that like this shit is not happening. What I'm saying is not real, that nobody needs to worry about the concerns that I am raising about the language of the bills. So he was trying to do this about this issue of extortion. So his point, and he's a former prosecutor, his point was like, I think that's ridiculous what you're saying, that the extortion laws could possibly be used to prosecute somebody in like any sort of scenario like this. And I was like, yep, except that this bill is amending the definition of extortion to specifically include compelling somebody to have an abortion. And what I'm responding to is someone else who just said that they think that you're not going to pay for you to go to college because we think that you should have an abortion would qualify as extortion. So I'm not making this shit up. Like the hypothetical was posed by a committee member and responded to by somebody on the other side. And it is supported, that theory of the case is supported by language that is absolutely being introduced by this bill. But apparently you have not read the amendments. I also loved it when he was like, have you read the statute on extortion? Have you read that?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, did you read the amendment?
Yeah, and the answer is no. And you didn't. So this went on for a long time with him just like reading, like his big laid in to like show me up, which was just reading the existing law and being like, I don't think it would qualify under that. Don't think it would qualify under that. And then he's like, ta-da. It's like, yes, thank you. So, just to make sure we're on the same page, because maybe we're not, then the amendments to this bill, right above what you just read about what would qualify as coerced abortion, the amendments are adding to the extortion statute this specific thing about trying to compel someone to have an abortion. And yeah, I did read the whole extortion, but it's what I'm pulling up on my phone again. Before I told you I'm going to the floor or I'm going to the table to testify about this, I pulled up the extortion statute again. Like, what are these fucking people talking about? What is the likelihood somebody could be prosecuted under this? And I will just say that unlike a lot of these committee members, then, there's lots of people have criticized me as a lawyer over the years for lots of different things, but almost never have I been criticized for not being prepared. I am always prepared. You read the amendments, you read the definition of statute under the current law, and then maybe you will understand what it is we're talking about before you try to just interject to make it seem like that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm not prepared, or that I am being hyperbolic. That's my
Yeah.
argument.
Oh my God. It was chef's kiss. It really was. It really was.
We get to the end of all of that when I'm like, yeah, but this is what the amendments say. And so that's why I'm saying this. And he's like, I don't remember exactly what he says, but like, he does not admit. He just is like, he just tries to kind of save face of being like, yeah, well, I'm just saying.
It's like, oh, I think, well, I don't know. We'll look at it. We'll look at it.
I don't even think it was.
Maybe someone can clarify it for me. Maybe someone, and I'm like,
it's like
she just clarified it for you.
You can't just be like, oh shit, I didn't realize that actually this bill is also amending the extortion law. I didn't realize that. I still, as a prosecutor, don't think that could be prosecuted, which I would have been happy.
That would have been great for him to go on the record saying that.
Because I think that's probably right. I don't hope and don't think that like it is likely that that type of behavior would be what a prosecutor would bring charges under extortion. So that's what he's getting at. But like, yeah, so you can just maybe be like, hey, yeah, I hadn't read it, but now I did read it. But I'd still say you're probably wrong because I don't think a prosecutor would bring it. That'd be helpful.
Yeah.
And truthful.
So the amendments did not address one issue that Representative Walters then brought up, which is the striking in the original coerced abortion statute of the term intentionally and leaving only in knowingly. And I'm not a lawyer, but you're our legal eagle, so that's why we have you here. And this was something that you also brought up as a concern. Representative Walters asked actually the same attorney that we played earlier from the conversation around HB 76, the same criminal defense attorney was asked this question. So let's listen to that.
The law presently says intentionally. Now we're going from intentionally to knowingly engages in the use of, and then, it keeps on going. So from your legal perspective, can you help me to understand, like, how will that terminology change impact the way that cases are tried and what have you?
That's what I flagged as a problem as well. And I think that the amendments that were offered do cure a lot of the problems that I saw and were noted with the bill about being open-ended and vague. And if you were really looking to tighten it up to make sure that all of the issues were addressed, that would be the last one that remained. I think that it would be appropriate to keep it intentional because that's what you're trying to criminalize. Someone intentionally forcing through some kind of unlawful physical force someone else not to have an abortion.
Yeah, so this actually goes back like really kind of perfectly to the conversation we were having earlier about advocates on the HB 76 law and about what intentionally means or doesn't mean in the law. And, in this context, then when Rep. Carlson and them came back to the table, then they were like, oh, no, it doesn't matter because, yes, we're changing the mental state from intentional to knowingly, but it still is that it has to be done with the intent to compel someone to have an abortion against their will. And I had looked at this and thought about this a lot. It is kind of honestly confusing what any change from intentional to knowingly would mean. But what it gets back to with what we talked about before is that it's talking about whether the conduct that you're engaging in at all, the acts that you're taking, the words that you're saying, whether those have to be done intentionally or just knowingly. So then with the embedded intent part, it is sort of like, I'm not sure how much in practical terms it would matter. But, the important thing for people to know is just that by lowering the mental state to knowingly, the intent is to make it easier to prosecute people and to make what your mental state had to be and how wrongful it had to be to lower the threshold on that. So that's never helpful in a criminal law like this that could already be used in a lot of sort of like vague and broad and who the fuck knows what sort of scenarios. You would always want the mental state to be like with intent as opposed to just like, I knew that I was doing this conduct. I knew I was saying these words to this person. If you were if you were trying to craft a law that was less likely to lead to unintended or bad consequences, you would keep the mental state at intentionally throughout.
Yeah. It was intentional, removing intentionally. So Representative Walters, I think, was kind of the star of the hearing because unlike some of the other members on the committee, she was very prepared. And the first comment that she made in the hearing, I thought was just fantastic. So I want to play that.
Rep. Carlson, if Louisiana had a theme movie, I would think it would be The Handmaid's Tales. And the reason being is that we have implemented more than 90 restrictions since Roe versus Wade, 1973, concerning abortion. And so what would your bill do that the other restrictions, don't do, and I heard your argument as far as in terms of the situations, that have happened. But eventually, I believe it becomes almost like an obsession to kind of keep beating a dead horse, because it seems that some way, somehow, people are finding abortion pills and everything else.
Like, amazing. I mean, so amazing. So first I'll say that back again to our previous conversation, then what she's referencing about, like the situations that they had talked about were, again, scenarios where, where they're claiming that someone had been coerced into having an abortion and should have been prosecuted, but wasn't able to be prosecuted, or some crap like that, that like, there's no vetting of these facts. There's no real like details about what these facts are. So I'm not at all convinced about what actually happened. One, of course, involving the mom who already is being prosecuted for getting out-of-state abortion pills for her daughter. So apparently there was a criminal solution to that problem.
Right.
And then beyond that, like, just like where you're like, what are you talking about? You came up with like one other scenario about somebody being locked in a bathroom, supposedly, which again, we've got that then. If that really occurred, the law could be used with that person. That's physical force, whatever. So just the examples they bring forward are not vetted as true. And even if they are extremely isolated examples that we already have solutions in the law for.
Right.
And then her reaction in general to this, I was like, girl, preach, 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 preach. Like, it is an obsession. Like, I mean.
Well, and it's so funny because I feel like every year as we are getting ready for the legislative session, we're like scanning the country, looking what other states are doing, because our session always starts after other states' sessions start. So we look at, the crazy, dumb shit that's being introduced in other places. And, we try to think about, would they introduce this here? Oh, we already have that. I mean, we have everything. So we have all the laws, especially when it comes to abortion. We have laws on top of laws on top of laws. And so
conflicting laws, confusing laws, overlapping laws, like, yeah, it's double, triple, quadruple criminalized. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So, it is funny because we're always like, well, what more can they do? Honestly, like what possibly could they introduce? And I mean, I'll admit, oftentimes I'm a little surprised by what they come up with. And I think it's because, and we've talked about this before, not on the podcast, but just conversations between you and I, it's hard to anticipate what diabolical people will do when you're not yourself diabolical and you're not thinking about, how can I continue to fundraise as the Louisiana Right to Life? How can I keep our, super anti-abortion supporters engaged and continuing to tithe to our organization? Well, we just have to keep coming up with more shit. So now they're just pulling up old laws, existing laws, and trying to make them more and more punitive and worse and worse.
That's right. And I mean, 100%. Like, they've got to keep making people believe that there are problems that need to be solved, and therefore you should donate to the Right to Life because they're the folks that are, at the Capitol trying to solve it. And the reality is that it's exactly like all the stuff we've been talking about, where the laws are already so extensive and so prohibitive and so punitive that anything they're coming up with now is like whatever it would be solving is barely happening. And beyond that, what it would do is, and subject a whole host of other
Create more problems.
Yes.
Yeah, just a
And
lot more problems.
and that's like, as just so people know, we have that the bill coming forward on Monday, HB 575, that is the exact same thing, but in the civil space, where you're trying to now create civil liability that would be so broad, so expansive. It would have such like detrimental effects on just like the delivery of healthcare in our state, because you guys are real mad that like people are able to access abortion pills from out of state.
Yeah. And I thought it was so interesting when Dietz brought that up, like, oh, in states where they have actually repealed their criminal HIV exposure statutes, then civil law is being weaponized against people. And we're seeing that exact same thing here.
In some ways, I mean, I am a civil lawyer, so that's, I know that world well. I mean, in some ways, then those consequences can be more dangerous, or the threat of them, because you don't need a DA to go along with it, right? You don't need a prosecutor to think that they have the facts to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody engaged in whatever conduct. The standard of proof is a lot lower, and just a regular old idiot who has a regular old idiot lawyer can bring civil suits to try to hold somebody liable. And that kind of liability, I mean, can bankrupt people. I mean, it can ruin people's lives financially. So yeah,
or reputationally.
All of the above.
Yeah.
The civil laws are, I mean, again, I'm a civil lawyer. I represent people both on the plaintiff and defense side. Like they are important tools in our arsenal of trying to right harms that have happened to people. But they're not, if they are weaponized or used as a blunt force tool, then the effects can be really just as devastating. And again, they can be weaponized by people who don't really necessarily know what they're doing or have a good intent about it, like with HB 575, where some random ass mom or some random ass person who thinks they're the biological father and thinks that, you had an abortion can sue your doctor or the manufacturer of medications that, we need in our state for a whole host of other purposes, just because there's potentially a big financial payout. And as an added benefit, maybe you get to harass your ex or your daughter-in-law who, you hate or whatever.
Right. Or the person who was raped by your son that,
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Last thing I want to say is super shout out to Rep. Walters. She is new, and so we're getting to know her, like we're getting to know a lot of these folks, and she is a badass. And
yes, she is.
She is a superstar. She is whip smart. She is not afraid to speak truth to power. She voted against the bill. She voted against HB amended. We'll be watching her going forward. We need somebody like her on the Criminal Injustice Committee, full stop.
Which means they will remove her next session. You're putting ideas in their head, Ellie. You're putting ideas in their head.
She's doing a good job. That's not, yeah.
She is doing a great job. Thanks, Rep. Walters, for being prepared, being smart, being fearless. Okay, so
it's a high bar, but yeah, it is.
Thanks for doing your job.
Oh, really? Thanks. Yeah.
Marks. Yeah. HB 575, you were just talking about, that bill is going to be in a hearing on Monday. And
so the day that this is being heard by our thousands and thousands and thousands of listeners. So if all of those thousands of listeners have not yet emailed or called the House Civil Law and Procedure Committee, they should do so. The bill is extremely problematic, extremely broad, and just really, honestly, insane. And so I'm hopeful that committee that does have a lot of lawyers on it, will hear that, but we need them to hear from our folks to explain why it is an untenable proposal that has no precedent in our law. but would create a really bad one going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we will put a link in the show notes for how people can do that. And then also next week is House Bill 429, which we haven't talked about yet, but this is by Representative Boyd, who was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. And this bill would prohibit employment discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. That bill will be in the House Labor Committee, which is not a fan of this bill. She has brought this bill because Rep. Delisha Boyd doesn't give a fuck, and she has principles and she has priorities, and this is one of them. And she has brought this bill every year that she's been in the legislature.
And folks should listen back to our interview with her where she explains the genesis of this and why it's important to her in terms of her niece and what she's seen like in her personal life with how the current law is extremely problematic to LGBTQ folks.
Yeah. So we will also put some information in the show notes for how people can contact that committee as well. And with that, I think we need to wrap up. This has been a long show. And what do we need the listeners to do, Ellie? Tell them.
Listen to the show. Because if you're already listening, tell people, other people, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies. Our enemies are listening. So tell people, listen to the show, rate it, review it, subscribe to it, all that stuff. And then send us your voice memo on Instagram with your seriously moments.
Yeah. You can also email the voice memo to us or just send us a link to an article, your own commentary, and we will talk about it on the podcast. So thanks, Ellie. Seriously is presented by Lift Louisiana, a nonprofit organization advocating for reproductive health rights and justice.